August 29th, 1526. King Louis II of Hungary sits on horseback, watching his armored knights thunder toward the Ottoman lines. This is supposed to be the knockout blow. Thousands of pounds of steel and muscle slamming into the enemy before they can react. The charge hits. Ottoman soldiers fall. For a moment, it looks like it's working. Then the trap closes. Cannons roar. Janissary muskets crack. Ottoman cavalry sweeps around both flanks like closing jaws. Within 2 hours, the Hungarian army doesn't just lose, it ceases to exist. The king himself will die fleeing the field, his body found days later in a stream. One battle, one afternoon, and Hungary as an independent kingdom is finished. This is the Battle of Mohács. And what happened on that field defies everything you think you know about medieval warfare. But here's what makes this story truly terrifying. The Hungarians weren't stupid. They weren't cowards. They had a plan. They had armored knights, the tanks of their era. They had experienced commanders who'd won battles before. And they still walked into a trap so perfect, so devastating, that military academies study it 500 years later. How does an entire kingdom die in an afternoon? Stay with me, because the answer will change how you see warfare forever. To understand why August 29th, 1526 became the worst day in Hungarian history, you need to understand what Hungary looked like before the Ottomans arrived. Picture a kingdom stretched to its breaking point. The treasury? Empty. Decades of mismanagement, corrupt nobles skimming taxes, endless small wars bleeding gold. The crown jewels had been pawned. Twice. King Louis II inherited a kingdom that looked powerful on a map, but was hollow on the inside. The nobility? Fractured. Hungarian lords spent more time fighting each other than preparing for invasion. Political factions schemed and backstabbed while the storm gathered on the southern horizon. Unity was a word they used in speeches, never in practice. The army? Theoretically impressive. Hungary could field tens of thousands of soldiers, heavily armored knights, experienced infantry, cavalry from the eastern plains. On paper, a formidable force. But paper doesn't win wars. Here's the problem nobody wanted to admit. Assembling that army took time. Weeks, sometimes months. Nobles had to gather their retinues. Supplies had to be organized. Men had to march from distant estates. And time was the one thing Hungary didn't have. Now let's talk about the storm. Suleiman the Magnificent. Remember that name. At 31 years old, he commanded the most powerful military machine on earth, the Ottoman Empire at its absolute peak. This wasn't some tribal raiding party. This was a professional army, disciplined, innovative, terrifyingly effective. They'd conquered Belgrade in 1521, Rhodes in 1522. Everywhere they went, kingdoms fell. And now Suleiman's eyes turned to Hungary. Why Hungary? Geography. Hungary was the gate to Central Europe. Take Hungary, and suddenly Vienna is exposed. Take Vienna, and the Habsburgs crumble. Take the Habsburgs, and who knows where it ends. Suleiman wasn't just planning a raid, he was planning an empire. In the spring of 1526, he mobilized everything. Estimates vary. The fog of history obscures exact numbers, but the Ottoman force likely numbered between 50,000 and 100,000 men. Some sources claim even more. But here's what really mattered. Artillery. The Ottomans brought between 150 and 200 cannons, maybe more. Massive bronze weapons that could shatter castle walls, lighter field pieces that could tear through cavalry formations. And something else. Something that would prove decisive. The Janissaries. Stop for a moment. Let me tell you about the Janissaries, because they're about to become the most important soldiers in this story. Elite infantry. Professional soldiers in an age when most armies were feudal levies. They trained constantly. They drilled with firearms when most European armies still considered guns a curiosity. They were disciplined, fanatical, and absolutely lethal. While Hungarian knights practiced individual combat, glorious charges, personal valor, the romance of cavalry warfare, Janissaries practiced something else entirely: coordinated volley fire. They would stand in ranks, raise their muskets, and fire together, on command. Then reload while the next rank fired. A continuous storm of lead that didn't care how expensive your armor was. The Hungarians had never faced anything like it. Not at this scale. They were about to learn. Word reached Hungary. The Ottomans were coming. King Louis II sent out the call. Every noble, every knight, every soldier who could carry a weapon, come now, come immediately. The kingdom needs you. And they came. Slowly. Too slowly. Here's where fate turns cruel. Hungary actually had more forces available. John Zapolya, the voivode of Transylvania, commanded a substantial army. Thousands of fresh troops that could have reinforced the king. Croatian forces were also gathering, but none of them arrived in time. Why? The historical record is murky. Some say Zapolya moved deliberately slow. He had his own ambitions for the throne. Others say simple logistics. Transylvania was far away. Roads were bad. Armies move at walking pace. Whatever the reason, the result was catastrophic. When Louis II assembled his forces near Mohács in late August, he had somewhere between 25,000 and 30,000 men. A respectable army, a dangerous army, against a force 3 times its size, maybe more. So here's the question that haunted Hungarian commanders on the night of August 28th. Do we fight? Think about their options. Really think about them. Option 1? Retreat. Fall back north. Wait for reinforcements. Let the Transylvanian army arrive. Combine forces and fight later with better odds. Logical, right? Sensible military strategy. But retreat means abandoning southern Hungary to Ottoman devastation. Villages burned. People enslaved. Everything the army was supposed to protect. Gone. And who knows if the Ottomans would give them a better battle later. Suleiman wasn't stupid. He might not let them choose the ground next time. Option 2. Wait at Mohács. Stay in position. Maybe the reinforcements arrive tomorrow, maybe the day after. But the Ottomans were already close. Every day of waiting was another day for Ottoman scouts to find their weaknesses. Another day for morale to crack. Another day for hungry soldiers to desert. Option 3. Attack. Yes, the odds were terrible. Yes, the Ottomans had more men, more guns, more everything. But the Hungarians had something too. Heavy cavalry. Armored knights who had shattered enemies before. One overwhelming charge at the right moment could break any army. It had worked before. Against Mongols. Against Turks in earlier battles. One glorious, unstoppable charge. What if they could do it again? What if they could hit the Ottomans before they fully deployed? Before all those cannons were in position? Before the trap could close? What if speed and shock could overcome numbers? It was a gamble. Everyone knew it was a gamble. They decided to roll the dice anyway. August 29th, 1526, the day of decision. Dawn breaks over the plains of Mohács. Hungarian soldiers wake knowing this might be their last sunrise. They pray. They check their weapons. They think about families they might never see again. King Louis II is 20 years old. 20. A boy wearing a crown he inherited at 10, leading men to a battle that will decide whether his kingdom survives. He puts on his armor, mounts his horse, rides to the front lines. Whatever else you say about Louis II, he didn't hide in the rear. He led from the front, like a king from the old stories. Brave? Absolutely. Foolish? We're about to find out. The Hungarian army forms up. Knights in gleaming armor, infantry with pikes and swords, cavalry from the eastern plains. Banners snap in the wind, the colors of noble houses that have defended Hungary for generations. They look impressive. They look ready. Across the field, the Ottomans are still arriving, still deploying, their massive army streaming onto the plain like a dark tide. Now or never, the command goes out, the charge begins, and in less than 2 hours, everything will be over. Let's freeze this moment, before the charge begins. What happens next will seem like madness unless you understand the thinking behind it. Heavy cavalry was the nuclear weapon of medieval warfare. Thousands of pounds of armored horse and rider moving at speed, hitting enemy lines like a freight train. Armies had broken before, shattered. Run! The Hungarians had seen it happen. They'd done it themselves. One massive cavalry charge. Hit the Ottoman vanguard before the main army deploys. Break them, cause panic. Watch the whole formation unravel. It wasn't impossible. It had worked before. But here's what the Hungarians didn't understand. The Ottomans had seen this playbook. They knew exactly what was coming. And they had prepared something special. The Hungarian army deploys, heavy cavalry in the center and flanks, the hammer that will decide everything. Across the field, the Ottomans are still organizing. Their vanguard has taken position, but the main body is still arriving. The Hungarian commanders see an opportunity, maybe the only one they'll get. Hit them now, before those cannons are positioned, before the janissaries form their killing lines. Now. Trumpets blare, knights lower their lances, and the thunder begins. Imagine the sound. 20,000 horses, hooves pounding earth, metal clanking, men shouting battle cries, the ground itself shaking. From the Ottoman lines, it must have looked like the end of the world, a wave of steel rolling across the plain, the flower of Hungarian nobility charging to victory or death. The charge covers a mile in minutes. No time to think. No time to reconsider. Physics takes over. The Ottoman vanguard waits, and here's the first sign something is wrong. They're not running. The charge slams home. The impact is catastrophic. Men are trampled, speared, thrown through the air. Ottoman soldiers die in heaps. For one shining moment, the charge seems to work. The vanguard buckles. Hungarian knights push forward, cutting down enemies. King Louis II must have felt hope surge. It's working, but the Ottoman vanguard isn't breaking. It's bending, deliberately, drawing the cavalry deeper into a trap about to close like a steel jaw. Here's what's happening to the charge. When thousands of horses hit infantry, they slow down. Bodies get in the way. Horses stumble. Formations compress. The knights are now pushing into a sea of enemies. Their lances become unwieldy. Men draw swords. The devastating charge becomes a grinding melee. Still winning, still pushing, still killing, but slowing down. Exactly what the Ottomans wanted. Behind the battered vanguard, the real killing force has deployed. Janissaries, thousands of them, stand in disciplined ranks, muskets loaded, officers watching with cold, calculating eyes, and the cannons. Those 150, 200, maybe more Ottoman cannons. In position now. Barrels aimed at the compressed Hungarian cavalry. The knights don't see this. They're in the chaos. Dust, screaming, battle. They can barely see 20 feet. But Ottoman commanders see everything. They watch the cavalry bunching up, becoming the perfect target. An order goes out, and the world explodes. The first cannon volley hits like the fist of God. Cannonballs tear through packed formations. Men and horses simply disappear. The noise alone is deafening. Dozens of cannons firing simultaneously. But the cannons are just the beginning. The Janissaries open fire. Volley after volley. Disciplined, coordinated. Lead balls punching through armor designed to stop swords, not bullets. Knights fall from saddles. Dead before they hit ground. The glorious charge has become a kill box. Cavalry packed together, slowed by their own success. They can't charge forward, can't retreat quickly, just targets. The Ottomans are shooting them to pieces. And it gets worse. Ottoman cavalry has been waiting on the flanks. Sipahis. Fast, mobile, deadly. Now they move. Picture closing jaws. The Hungarian army bleeds from cannon fire and musket volleys. From both sides, Ottoman cavalry sweeps around like arms reaching to embrace. Some commanders try to react. But you can't turn heavy cavalry quickly when it's engaged and disorganized. The circle closes. The Hungarian army isn't just losing, it's surrounded, trapped on an open plain with enemies on every side. Losing becomes annihilation. Let me make sure you understand what happened. The Hungarian plan wasn't stupid. It was based on principles that worked for centuries. Shock cavalry, hit hard, break formations. The Ottomans didn't just counter it, they weaponized it. They let the charge hit, sacrificed their vanguard deliberately, taking casualties to draw cavalry deeper, slow it down, compress it. Then they unleashed combined arms warfare. Artillery, muskets, cavalry, all working together. Cannons shattered formations. Janissaries killed survivors. Cavalry sealed the trap. This wasn't medieval warfare anymore. This was something new. The Hungarians had charged into a military revolution. Maybe 30 minutes have passed. 45 at most. Already the Hungarian army is dying. Men falling by thousands. Cannon fire doesn't stop. Musket volleys don't stop. Ottoman cavalry tightens its grip. Some units fight with incredible bravery. They know they're doomed but keep fighting, selling their lives dearly. Others try to flee. Most don't make it. Ottoman cavalry hunts them down. Blood and gunpowder hang over the field. Screams create a constant, horrifying chorus. This is what the death of an army looks like. And somewhere in that chaos, King Louis II realizes the truth. The battle is lost. The kingdom is lost. Time to run. How long does it take to destroy a kingdom? History books will say the Battle of Mohács lasted about 2 hours. Some accounts claim it was over in 1. The truth is somewhere between, closer to 90 minutes of actual fighting before organized Hungarian resistance simply ceased to exist. 90 minutes. Think about that. In the time it takes to watch a movie, an army of 25,000 men was effectively annihilated. A kingdom that had stood for 5 centuries received its death blow. But those 90 minutes weren't uniform. The battle didn't end all at once. It died in stages, each more desperate than the last. The first stage. Shock. When the Ottoman trap closed, Hungarian commanders needed time to understand what was happening. The charge had worked, hadn't it? They'd broken through the vanguard. They were winning. Then the cannons spoke. Then the muskets cracked. Then the cavalry appeared on both flanks. Human minds aren't built to process catastrophe instantly. For precious minutes, Hungarian officers tried to make sense of the chaos, tried to give orders that might still turn things around, tried to believe this was recoverable. It wasn't. The second stage, fragmentation. An army is a single organism only as long as communication holds. Officers relay orders. Units respond in coordination. The whole moves as one. When that breaks down, an army becomes a crowd. The Ottoman encirclement didn't just kill Hungarians, it severed them from each other. Units that had trained together, fought together, couldn't see each other through the smoke and dust. Orders from command couldn't reach the front lines. The front lines couldn't report back. Each Hungarian formation became an island, fighting alone, dying alone. Some units held together through sheer discipline and courage. Veterans who'd fought Ottomans before, who understood that breaking formation meant death. They formed defensive circles, bristling with weapons, selling every life at maximum cost. Others shattered. Men who'd never seen combat this intense, who'd expected glory and found slaughter instead. They ran. They threw down weapons. They begged for mercy that rarely came. The army was coming apart. The third stage, the rout. There's a moment in every lost battle when everyone knows, not just suspects, knows. The cause is hopeless. Survival becomes the only goal. At Mohács, that moment came fast. Once it did, the Hungarian army stopped being an army. It became thousands of individuals all trying to escape the same trap at the same time. Picture the chaos. Men shoving past each other, horses trampling infantry, knights throwing away shields to run faster, screaming, pushing, trampling, and behind them, around them, the Ottomans, killing with methodical efficiency. Their cavalry didn't just let the Hungarians run. They pursued. They encircled fleeing groups. They cut down runners from behind. The flat terrain that was supposed to favor the Hungarian charge now became a death sentence. No forests to hide in, no hills to rally behind. Just open ground where mounted Ottomans could hunt fleeing infantry at will. The slaughter continued long after the battle was decided. Now, the king. Louis II was 20 years old, a boy who'd inherited a dying kingdom and was now watching it actually die. Where was he during the collapse? The historical record is unclear. Some accounts place him in the thick of fighting, leading charges, rallying men. Others suggest he stayed back, directing the battle. Probably a mix of both. What we know for certain, when the rout began, Louis tried to escape. This wasn't cowardice. Kings weren't supposed to die in lost battles if they could help it. A dead king meant succession crisis, civil war, vultures circling a wounded nation. If Hungary was to survive Mohács, it needed Louis alive. So he ran. With a small group of retainers and guards, the king of Hungary fled north, away from the Ottoman encirclement, away from the massacre, toward the Danube and safety. He almost made it. Here's where history becomes tragedy. The escape route took Louis toward the Seal stream, a minor waterway, normally insignificant. But recent rains had swollen it beyond its banks. The crossing that should have been easy had become treacherous. What happened next has been debated for 500 years. The traditional account: Louis tried to ride across. His horse stumbled or slipped on the muddy bank. The king, weighed down by heavy armor, fell into the water. Couldn't get up. Drowned in a stream that barely came to a man's waist. Other theories exist. Maybe he was wounded and too weak to save himself. Maybe his horse was injured from battle. Maybe the current was stronger than expected. Maybe he was already dead from wounds when he went into the water. We'll never know for certain. What we know is this: King Louis II of Hungary died on August 29th, 1526. His body wasn't found for weeks. When they finally pulled him from the mud of the Sila stream, Hungary's fate was already sealed. Let's count the dead. The numbers are devastating. Somewhere between 14,000 and 20,000 Hungarian soldiers died at Mohács. Some estimates go higher. The exact count is impossible. Many bodies were never recovered, never counted, never buried properly. But the raw numbers don't capture the true loss. This wasn't just an army. This was the ruling class of an entire nation. Look at who died that day. 2 archbishops, 5 bishops, hundreds of nobles, lords and knights who governed provinces, administered justice, led their communities. An entire generation of Hungarian leadership, cut down in a single afternoon. 7 royal councillors, gone. The Lord Palatine, Hungary's highest-ranking official after the king, gone. Countless lesser nobles whose names history didn't bother to record, gone. Hungary didn't just lose a battle, it lost the men who knew how to run a country. The Ottoman casualties? Comparatively light. Estimates range from 2,500 to 2,000 dead, maybe a few thousand wounded. Think about that ratio. For every Ottoman soldier killed, the Hungarians lost 10. Maybe more. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Suleiman the Magnificent rode across the field after the fighting ended. What did he see? Contemporary accounts describe him as moved by the carnage. So many dead. The field carpeted with bodies, men, horses, broken weapons, shattered banners. When they brought him King Louis's body, Suleiman reportedly said something like, "I came indeed in arms against him, but it was not my wish that he should thus be cut off before he scarcely tasted the sweets of life and royalty." Maybe genuine, maybe propaganda. Either way, Suleiman understood what he'd accomplished. In a single afternoon, he'd broken Hungarian resistance for a generation. The path to Central Europe lay open. The Ottoman army continued north. Budapest fell without a fight. The Ottomans burned, looted, and enslaved. Then, as autumn approached, they withdrew, taking over 100,000 captives back to Ottoman territory. They'd be back. They always came back now. But here's the cruelest part. The part that would haunt Hungary for 150 years. Louis II died without an heir. No son, no clear successor. Just a dead king, a devastated army, and a power vacuum that would tear the kingdom apart. The real catastrophe was just beginning. The king is dead. The army is destroyed. Now what? This is where Mohács transforms from military disaster into national catastrophe. Because what happened after the battle was somehow worse than the battle itself. Hungary didn't just lose, it shattered, split into pieces that wouldn't be reunited for over 150 years. And it all came down to one terrible question. Who rules now? Louis II had no children, no obvious heir. His death created exactly the kind of succession crisis that medieval kingdoms dreaded most. Two men stepped forward to claim the crown. The first, John Zápolya. Remember him? The voivode of Transylvania, whose army never arrived at Mohács. Some said he'd delayed deliberately, letting Louis die so he could take the throne himself. Others said he simply couldn't march fast enough. Either way, Zápolya had something crucial. He was Hungarian. A native son. The nobility's choice. Within weeks of Mohács, a faction of surviving nobles crowned him King of Hungary. The second claimant, Ferdinand of Habsburg, brother-in-law to the dead king. His claim came through marriage. Louis's sister was Ferdinand's wife. The Habsburgs were the most powerful family in Europe. They had money. They had armies. They had connections. And they weren't about to let Hungary slip away. Ferdinand gathered his own supporters, got himself crowned too. Now Hungary had two kings. Neither would back down. What followed was civil war, Hungarian against Hungarian, as if Mohács hadn't killed enough of them. Already! But here's the twist that made everything worse. Zápolya was losing. The Habsburgs had more resources, more soldiers, more staying power. By 1528, Ferdinand's forces had pushed Zápolya out of most of Hungary. The native candidate was on the verge of total defeat. So Zápolya made a deal with the devil. He allied with the Ottomans. Think about that. A Hungarian king, fighting for Hungarian independence, invited the very empire that had just slaughtered Hungarian armies at Mohács to help him keep his throne. Suleiman was delighted. Why conquer Hungary directly when Hungarians would do the fighting for you? He recognized Zápolya as the legitimate king and sent Ottoman troops to support him. Now the civil war had three players, Habsburgs, Zápolya, and the Ottoman Empire playing both sides, getting stronger while Hungary bled. By the late 1530s, a new reality had emerged. Nobody could win. The fighting had ground to a stalemate. Hungary was partitioned, carved up like a carcass between predators. Three pieces, three separate territories where one kingdom had stood. The first piece, Royal Hungary. This was the western and northern strip that Ferdinand controlled. The Habsburgs held it, defended it, governed it, taxed it. It included the old capital of Pressburg and the crucial border fortresses that kept the Ottomans from pushing into Austria. Royal Hungary remained Christian, remained connected to Europe, remained, in theory, the real Hungary, the legal continuation of the medieval kingdom. But it was a fragment, a rump state, maybe a quarter of what Hungary had been before Mohács. The second piece, Ottoman Hungary, the center of the Old Kingdom, the heartland, Budapest itself, the great plains that had been Hungary's breadbasket, all of it under Ottoman rule now. The Ottomans didn't just occupy this territory, they transformed it. They divided it into administrative units. They brought in settlers. They built mosques where churches had stood. They collected taxes that flowed to Constantinople, not to any Hungarian treasury. For 150 years, the center of Hungary was simply gone, not Hungarian anymore. Part of the Ottoman Empire, as thoroughly as Egypt or Greece or any other conquered territory. Generations of Hungarians were born, lived, and died under Ottoman rule. Their grandchildren would barely remember what an independent Hungary had looked like. The third piece, Transylvania, Zápolya's base. After his death, this eastern region became a semi-independent principality. Technically, it was an Ottoman vassal, paying tribute to Constantinople, following Ottoman foreign policy. But internally, Transylvanians governed themselves. It was a strange existence, not quite free, not quite conquered, playing Habsburgs against Ottomans, trying to survive between two empires. Transylvania preserved Hungarian culture during the occupation. Hungarian language, Hungarian traditions, Hungarian identity. When Hungary eventually reunited, it would be partly because Transylvania had kept the flame alive. But that reunification was 150 years away. Nobody in 1540 knew if it would ever come. 150 years. Let that sink in. That's how long Hungary remained divided. From Mohács in 1526 until the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, when the Ottomans finally withdrew. 150 years is 5 or 6 generations, great-great-great-great-grandchildren. People who were born, grew old, and died in a divided Hungary, who never knew anything else. For comparison, 150 years before today takes us back to the 1870s, before World War I, before World War II, before the Cold War, before computers, before cars, before radio. That's how long the consequences of one afternoon lasted. And during those 150 years, constant warfare. The border between Habsburg Hungary and Ottoman Hungary wasn't a line on a map. It was a war zone. Fortresses facing each other across devastated countryside. Raids and counter-raids. Villages burned. Populations displaced. The long Turkish War from 1593 to 1606. The failed siege of Vienna in 1683. Decades of grinding conflict that kept Hungary poor, underdeveloped, and bleeding. Mohács wasn't just a battle. It was a wound that refused to heal for a century and a half. Who won? The Ottomans, obviously, in the short term. Suleiman got everything he wanted. A broken Hungary, an open path toward Vienna, tribute flowing into Ottoman coffers. But look longer term, and the picture gets complicated. The Habsburgs eventually won the war. By 1699, they'd pushed the Ottomans out of Hungary entirely. The kingdom was reunited, under Habsburg rule, but reunited. Hungary survived. Barely. Changed. Traumatized. But still there. The Ottomans? Their failure to take Vienna in 1683 marked the beginning of a long decline. The empire that had seemed invincible in 1526 would spend the next 2 centuries slowly crumbling. Nobody really won Mohács. Not in the end. The battle just produced 150 years of losers. But there's one more dimension to this story. One that military historians find most fascinating. Why did Mohács happen the way it did? What made the Ottoman victory so complete, so devastating, so fast? The answer changes how we understand warfare itself. Military academies still teach Mohács. 500 years later, officers in a dozen countries study what happened on that Hungarian plain. Why? Plenty of battles have been decisive. Plenty of armies have been destroyed. What makes Mohács special? The answer is simple. Mohács isn't just a battle, it's a masterclass in why armies die. Let's strip away the drama for a moment. Look at Mohács with cold, analytical eyes. What actually happened? The Hungarians brought a single-arm army. Heavy cavalry was their weapon, their only real weapon. Everything else, infantry, light cavalry, artillery, existed to support the knights. The entire Hungarian battle plan depended on one thing working: the charge. The Ottomans brought a combined arms army. Infantry that could hold ground, artillery that could break formations, muskets that could kill at range, light cavalry that could encircle, heavy cavalry for the finishing blow, each element supporting the others, each element covering the weaknesses of the rest. When the Hungarian charge hit, it was steel against steel, knight against soldier. The Hungarians were better at that kind of fighting. Man for man, they were probably superior. But they weren't fighting man for man. They were fighting a system. Here's the critical insight. The thing that makes Mohács immortal in military thinking. The Ottomans didn't beat the Hungarian cavalry. They made cavalry irrelevant. Think about what happened. The charge worked. The initial impact was devastating. Hungarian knights killed thousands of Ottoman soldiers in those first minutes. And it didn't matter. Because while the knights were winning their fight, the Ottomans were winning the battle. Artillery repositioned. Janissaries formed firing lines. Light cavalry circled the flanks. The system responded to the threat, absorbed it, and destroyed it. The Hungarians had a weapon. The Ottomans had an army. That's the difference. That's what military theorists study. That's why Mohács still matters. But there's another lesson here, one that's harder to quantify but maybe more important. The Hungarians fought before they were ready. Remember, reinforcements were coming. The Transylvanian army was days away. Croatian forces were gathering. If Louis II had waited 1 week, maybe even a few days, he might have had 40,000 men instead of 25,000. Would that have changed the outcome? Impossible to know for certain. The Ottomans still had superior numbers and superior tactics, but it would have been a different battle, a closer battle, maybe a survivable battle. Instead, the Hungarians chose to fight immediately. They gambled everything on catching the Ottomans before they deployed. A reasonable gamble, but still a gamble. They lost. Why did they take that risk? Why not wait? This is where strategy meets psychology, where military decisions become human decisions. Louis II was 20 years old. His kingdom was crumbling. His treasury was empty. His nobles were fractious and unreliable. Every day he waited was another day for his army to desert, for morale to crack, for the coalition to fall apart. He needed a victory, not just strategically, psychologically. He needed to prove that Hungary could still fight, that the crown still meant something, that he was a king worth following. Waiting felt like weakness. Attacking felt like strength. So he attacked, and his kingdom died for it. There's a brutal lesson here about the gap between feeling strong and being strong. The Hungarian charge looked magnificent. All that armor, all those banners, all that courage and fury thundering across the plain. It felt like strength. It felt like the kind of decisive action that changes history. It was suicide. Real strength would have been patience, retreating, letting the Ottomans exhaust themselves chasing a Hungarian army that wouldn't stand and fight, waiting for reinforcements, fighting on better terms later. But that kind of strength doesn't make your heart pound. It doesn't look like the stories of great knights and glorious victories. It looks like running away. Louis II couldn't afford to look like he was running away. So he stood and fought. And lost everything. One more lesson, the hardest one. Sometimes you can do everything right and still lose. The Hungarian commanders weren't stupid. They saw the odds. They made a reasonable calculation, hit the Ottomans before they're ready, use cavalry shock to break their formation, win through speed and violence. It almost worked. The charge did hit before the Ottomans fully deployed. It did shatter the vanguard. For a few minutes, the Hungarian gamble was paying off. They just didn't know they were facing a military revolution. The combination of disciplined musket fire, massed artillery, and coordinated cavalry encirclement. This was new. This was cutting-edge military technology and tactics. The Hungarians had never faced anything like it at this scale. They adapted as fast as they could. They fought with incredible bravery. They did everything possible with the tools and knowledge they had. It wasn't enough. Sometimes the other side is just better. Sometimes history moves against you. Sometimes one afternoon ends a kingdom no matter what you do. So, what do we take from Mohács? If you're a military strategist, combined arms wins. Single-arm tactics, no matter how good, will eventually fail against a coordinated system. If you're a leader, don't fight until you're ready. Patience isn't weakness. Choosing your moment is half the battle. If you're a student of history, one afternoon can reshape centuries. The world is more fragile than we think. Kingdoms rise and fall on single decisions, single battles, single days. August 29th, 1526. The sun set on a field covered with Hungarian dead. A king lay drowned in a shallow stream. An army had ceased to exist. A kingdom had received its death sentence. The Hungarians bet everything on one charge. The Ottomans let it land, then showed them what a real army looks like. In under 2 hours, a kingdom died on that field. But here's the thing about death. It's not always the end of the story. Hungary survived. Not as an independent kingdom, not for 150 years, but as an idea, as a language, as a culture, as a people who remembered what they'd lost and dreamed of getting it back. They did get it back, eventually. The Habsburgs drove out the Ottomans. Hungary reunited. The nation that died at Mohács rose again. It took 150 years, 5 generations, countless more deaths. But it happened. Mohács was a catastrophe. But it wasn't the end. Maybe that's the final lesson, the one they don't teach in military academies. Kingdoms can fall in an afternoon, but peoples are harder to kill. Ideas are harder to kill. Identity is harder to kill. The Ottomans won the battle. They won the war. They occupied Hungary for a century and a half, but they never conquered what Hungary meant. And in the end, that's what survived.